How's it going? I'm Dave, founder of Halloween Year Round, and here we are for week 2 of the Great Shudder Challenge. For those of you who didn't see last week, the mission is simple. By the end of 2020, watch every single movie, TV show, and podcast on Shudder. I'm about like a third. Well, I was a third when I started. I'm about 40% in right now is sort of where the stats are. I'll update you guys on that some other week. But I just wanted to sit down and do our second of our weekly Coffin Side Chats, where I will sit down and discuss everything I've seen this week. So, let's begin. Hey, all you cool ghouls and creepy kittens out there. I started off this week with Deadly Manners. So after I really enjoyed Video Palace, I wanted to get into another one of the Shudder podcasts, especially because I've got a half-hour commute to and from work. There's 10 episodes. They're about 20-30 minutes each, so it kind of worked out perfectly. Every morning going in and every evening coming home, I was listening to an episode. So Deadly Manners is this sort of like 50s murder mystery with, a cast of, shall we say, very eccentric characters. It feels a lot like a radio play. Everything from like the cheesiness of the area, which is intentional, I get, but kind of, I liked Video Palace better, but a lot of that had to do with the fact that it's about a video store, and I'm just really into that. What was really cool about this one, though, was its voice cast is really, top-notch. I'm talking Kristen Bell, Dennis O'Hare from American Horror Story, Alicia Bowe from 13 Reasons Why, RuPaul, Anna Chlumsky, and the thing is narrated by LeVar Burton himself. So even though plot-wise, it's campy, it's kind of cheesy, the characters are, well, none of them are likable, but I kind of think that's the point. In a lot of ways, it feels like it was trying to be Clue, but Clue, I think, was just a bit wittier, a bit sharper, a bit funnier, had Tim Curry, and, well, you can't top that. So I will probably pick another podcast to listen to on my commute to and from work for next week. To Hell and Back, the Kane Hodder story. So like any other horror fan, I was, very aware of Kane Hodder, love him as Jason, as Victor Crowley. He's up there, I would say, with the likes of Robert Englund in terms of, iconic horror actor. But I didn't really know a lot about his own personal story, and that's what I loved about this documentary was, it talked about, his career, but I loved kind of just learning, who he is as a person, and the tragedy, it's beneath the exterior of like this, tough guy who plays slasher villains, was just this really sensitive kid who endured relentless bullying. It makes you want to cry. And then to hear the story about how, he almost died from a fire stunt gone wrong when he was young and kind of didn't know what he was doing as much as he probably should have. And he's the first one to admit that. I love that anytime, whether it's the fire stunt or anytime in his life that something went wrong, he doesn't throw around blame. He's such a humble person, and I respect the hell out of that. I think it's amazing that he went from nearly dying in a fire stunt to performing countless fire stunts in movies, which I've seen. I'm sure a lot of you guys have seen. I think that takes real courage, and it was really cool to get to kind of see not Kane Hodder the actor, not Kane Hodder the icon, but just Kane Hodder the person. I thought was just really fascinating. Also, fun story. I peed next to him at a urinal at Monster Mania a couple years ago. I walk into the bathroom, I've got to go, in and out real quick. And lo and behold, the guy at the urinal next to me is Kane Hodder. I didn't say anything because we all know, the rules of the men room, face forward, no talking. But that's my claim to fame. I peed next to Kane Hodder. The House That Dripped Blood. So I saw this one. It kind of sold me on just its cast. It's this British horror anthology from the early 70s, and it's got like the ultimate trio between Christopher Lee, Peter Cushing, and the third Doctor himself, John Pertwee. So you've got these three just icons of British cinema. Two of them, particularly from horror with Lee and Cushing. I love the story about the horror writer whose creation is like coming to life. As a fellow horror writer, that really resonated with me, and that's something that kind of freaks me out a little bit. Not that something I write could come to life, but just the dark places that your mind goes to write this stuff is just it can be disturbing. It also dealt with vampires. We got a little bit of like a creepy cursed voodoo doll. So you've got these 4 different stories revolving around this one house, and the house is supposed to be the source of all the evil, the chaos. Interestingly, though, despite its title, The House That Dripped Blood, this is actually a PG horror film. Now, PG by early 70s standards. This is before PG-13, so, Gremlins was PG, Poltergeist is PG, and The House That Dripped Blood is PG. V. No, not V for Vendetta, and not V, that sci-fi miniseries that Independence Day totally ripped off, from the early 80s. V it remains one of the only horror movies ever produced and released in the Soviet Union. It came out in 1967. And in doing some research on it, I kind of went down this rabbit hole, which, as a former history major, fascinated me, that the Soviet Union was just really not known for its horror movies. A lot of the films they produced were comedies that were meant to distract people, and epic propaganda historical dramas about the glory of the Soviet Union and Lenin and Stalin and all that. So horror doesn't really fit in with that. Horror is the type of genre that's meant to, challenge these conventional norms, that's meant to challenge society. So just the fact that it was made was kind of awesome. It has that like old school 60s vibe to it. It almost feels like a Hammer film from the Soviet Union. Not that it is a Hammer film, but just its look, its tone, its vibes, everything about it, with a little bit of like the 60s psychedelic stuff thrown in, if you know what I mean. Given its low budget, and given the fact that it had to go through a whole bunch of hoops and Soviet era censors, it's kind of really amazing that the effects are as good as they are. We get this giant demonic monster, the titular V, which is actually a figure of, I believe it's Ukrainian folklore. I did some digging into it. And you could say it's the equivalent of like a boogeyman or a Loch Ness monster, or perhaps more accurately, a Jersey Devil of that area. This V, this demon. All Cheerleaders Die. The best way I could describe it is, imagine if you took the tone and kind of sharp cynicism that was Heather's, but made it way darker and added like a supernatural zombie-esque twist to it. I love the idea of just everyone in high school, turning on each other, being so cutthroat. It can be a a brutal world to exist in, especially when you're dealing with clicks and popularity. And then to introduce the whole, well, we're dead, and how that affects them, and how it's almost like being dead somehow makes you stop caring about things like popularity. Things that seem so important to you as a high school student completely change when you become a zombie, which I can't speak from experience on, but I imagine that change would take place. Plus, for those of you who have seen it, I could not stop laughing when the guy is referring to, what he's referring to when he says, oh, it's like a freezer up there. No, buddy, it's not. The Whistler. So this was one I just watched. I think it was all Cheerleaders Die. So I just finished that. I'm about to, shut off the projector, call it a night. And I'm like, oh, that cover looks cool. It's only 11 minutes long, and I haven't really watched many of the short films on here. I need to consume them as well. So plot-wise, you're not going to get a whole lot with 11 minutes, but I love the kind of creepy tone that it captured. It almost felt like one of those scary stories to tell in the dark from Alvin Schwartz. It felt like it could have been one of those stories adapted into a little 11-minute short. It was creepy. It had this eerie vibe to it that, when I was a kid, I always used to be kind of freaked out to look out the window at what was outside at night, and I was afraid that something could be out there looking back at me. And if I had seen this film, if it had been made when I was a kid, it would have been the scariest thing in the world to me. Downrange. I don't know that I would call this one as much conventional straight up horror as I would call it more of just a really tense action thriller where the plot is simple enough. You've just got these group of friends stranded on the side of the road with a flat tire, and in the distance is some crazed sniper just taking shots at them. And they're hiding behind the car. They're stuck there for hours. He's toying with them. And it's tense. It's brutal. It's, unfortunately, in this day and age, it's kind of very relevant in terms of gun violence. It reminded me a lot of, for those old enough to remember, the DC Sniper, when that was one of the biggest news stories, I think, from back in 2002. I was in middle school, and I remember all over the news, people were just so scared because you had this guy. Well, actually, it was two of them. I believe it was one guy and his teenaged accomplice, and there was no rhyme or reason to it. They were just taking shots at people. So that idea is such a frightening one, and the fact that was a real news story, that that really happened, kind of makes Downrange, even though it's so simple, way more frightening than anything else you could find on Shudder or with anything, just because it is plausible. My only major issue with it, and I hope this is not a spoiler, if it is, just mute me for the next few seconds, I feel like it would have worked better and it would have been more suspenseful if we never actually saw the sniper. If it had just been treated like the truck driver from Duel. We don't see much of him, but we see just enough to kind of lose that air of mystery that I thought worked so perfectly, for the first 30 minutes before you saw him. The Beach House. If you wanted another reason to not want to go to the beach, I suppose, with COVID, with Jaws, the Beach House could be your perfect excuse. I was not expecting it to get as Lovecraftian as it did. I wasn't really sure what to expect, but a lot of the, every Thursday Shudder will drop another, original or exclusive, and I never really know what to expect. I like to kind of go into them as fresh as I can. So with this one, I spent the first hour, admittedly, honestly, I was a bit bored. It takes a long time to get started. It's like the first hour is just setup, characters, some awkward moments. If this wasn't on Shudder, you could imagine that this was like a coming-of-age drama about some college dropout who, rediscovers his life purpose on a beach trip with his girlfriend and two friends of his parents. Then in the last half hour is when we get into the weird cosmic body horror that I still cringe just thinking about the one particular image where the girl was like pulling this like worm thing out of her foot. I have like this weird I don't know that I call it a phobia, but just I have like this weird cringe reaction to, anytime something is being like pulled from your skin. Don't pull things from my skin. I don't like things being pulled from my skin. Suburban Gothic. I love the idea that this one captures the spirit of what it's like to be the outcast, particularly in your own family. You've got this main character who's coming back to live at home. It's very clear, especially from his dad, that he's not thrilled that he's back at home. And again, all of this could just work on its own as a comedy, but it has to introduce the horror aspect. So the house is haunted. There's like the skeletal remains of somebody on the property that's causing issues. And it had a lot of moments that made me laugh. It's clever, but in terms of horror comedies and in terms of like witty horror comedies, I've seen much better. I've seen much more memorable. This one, I definitely enjoyed it, but even now, as I'm talking about it, I'm having trouble. I only watched it a few days ago, and I'm like, wait, what happened in that one? It wasn't one that really stuck with me. Another Evil. Watching this movie the day after watching Suburban Gothic just made me realize how much I thought Suburban Gothic was okay and how hilarious and creative Another Evil was. We've all seen a million movies about house is haunted, ghost hunter comes in, takes care of the situation, whether it's Insidious, Conjuring, Poltergeist, you name it. I love how this is the only one where we get a sense of the problems that the ghost hunter has, and where, in the end, minor spoilers, this guy just really wants a friend. He's sad, he's desperate, he's lonely. One of the best highlights of the movie is its star, Mark Prosh. Am I saying that right? If I butchered it, I apologize. I know him best from What We Do in the Shadows. He also played one of the warehouse guys on The Office in the later seasons. He perfectly embodies just this sad, lonely, desperate man who, after he takes care of the ghost problem, he wants to stay just because it's like he has a friend now. And then it becomes, we got rid of the ghosts. How do we get rid of the ghost hunter? One review I was reading, I forget if it was on IMDb or on Shudder, it described the movie as Cable Guy meets The Conjuring. And I thought that was sort of the perfect explanation. That just, what if you, instead of the desperate person wanting to be your friend being your cable guy, what if he was your exorcist? And more importantly, if you couldn't get rid of him, and if he got crazy and desperate enough, would you turn to the ghosts to help get rid of him? Stakeland. It felt more like a zombie movie with the way the creatures moved and acted and the whole post-apocalyptic angle. They felt more like zombies than vampires, even though they called them vamps, or sometimes they just called them, which automatically made me think of the giant ant movie from the 50s. That said, I loved how bleak it was. I think you've got a lot of dystopian thrillers, and you've got a lot of post-apocalyptic, horror and thrillers that it almost feels like the society they're in is still functioning. There's still groups. There's still all of these cogs and wheels of society still moving. This one really captured the spirit of just not how scary living in a post-apocalypse could be, but just how depressing and boring it could be. You know, it reminded me a lot of stuff like The Road or The Book of Eli. It also features a really great performance by Danielle Harris, where I'm a huge fan of hers from Halloween and from Hatchet. I didn't know she could sing, and in this she plays kind of a much more mild-mannered, vulnerable character than we're used to seeing, so it was just really cool to see that kind of range from her. The sequel is also on Shudder. I will be checking that out. I don't know if it'll be this week, but it will be some other week if I'm to win this challenge. The Last Showing. When you take an on-screen legend like Robert Englund and you put him in a movie where he's working in a movie theater making a horror movie, I feel like the meta horror writes itself. That didn't really happen here. This wasn't a case where you had a lot of potential and a really cool premise. I just don't think the execution was all there. I love the idea that here's this guy who's been working in the theater for longer than he should have been. I used to work in a movie theater. I know it gets so bad. Let me just paint a picture for you. I was able to see movies for free, and I still quit just because it got to be too much. Cleaning theaters after a group of preschoolers just saw the next Disney movie, it's just not worth it. So I get the idea that someone who works there could get to the point of just frustration and desperation with their life that they're like, you know what, screw it. I'm going to make my own horror movie and kill people in this theater. Again, it should have written itself from there. I just felt like it spent more time kind of being long and drawn out, and it didn't go for all the opportunities that I was hoping it would go for. That, and again, this is a minor nitpick. It's set in England. It was actually shot at a movie theater in the UK, and everyone in it is British. I love Robert Englund. I don't love his accent. It was a bit distracting, but it was, I mean, I'm glad I watched it. I certainly liked seeing that side to Robert Englund. It was the closest I think I've seen him to playing a role almost like Robin Williams did in Photo Booth. Not Photo Booth, 1 Hour Photo. I'm thinking of Phone Booth with Colin Farrell. But I just think they could have taken it so much further than they actually did. That's all. And finally, last movie of the week, Class of 1984. All right. Where to begin with this absurd, insane movie that I can't believe I didn't know about already? So, before I talk about it, minor disclaimer that I should discuss. You may not know this about me. I used to be a high school teacher. When I graduated from college, I had a degree in history and social studies education for middle and high school. So I worked as substitute teacher for about 4 or 5 years. I did some long-term subbing assignments here and there, and I worked for a few months in what is considered to be one of the worst and most dangerous school districts in the state. So I'm uniquely in a place that I've had this experience. I've worked a job like the main character worked here. This was not at all what my experience was like. I had some troublemakers. I had some issues. Ultimately, not that you guys need to know or care. It was never about the kids that made me want to leave teaching, even at the rough school that I was working in. I loved working with the kids. It was the nonsense from administration that just frustrated me to no end and made me ultimately leave that career path. So when you have a movie where a teacher whips out a handgun on a student to get him to pay attention, I mean, I'm sure there are teachers that wish they could just do that. I don't know that I've ever actually wished that, in a non absurdly sarcastic manner, but just that made me laugh. It starts out like this classroom drama, like you're watching Stand and Deliver or Lean on Me. That is not where it goes. It goes to some very dark, murderous places where, like, the teacher and the gang that he's dealing with, they're like straight up going full purge on each other with, wrecking cars. They kill the guy's cat. They attack his pregnant wife. Oh my God. The teacher goes from, he's a music teacher, so he goes from at the beginning being like Mr. Holland in Mr. Holland's Opus to full Rambo by like the last 15 minutes. Like the whole first half hour, I'm like, why is this movie on Shudder? This is just like an education drama. And then by the end, oh my God, he's using a saw on a student with like gleeful determination and just there's savagery in those eyes. But speaking as someone who has worked as a teacher in the high school system, I get it. I get it. It's one of Michael J. Fox's very first movies. He looks like a legitimate teenager in this more so than he does in Back to the Future. So there you have it. Those were our movies for this week. It was a very busy week. I somehow, clocked in 12 movies in one podcast. I don't know that every week will be that productive. I certainly hope it is, and I'll finish the challenge by Halloween. That would be... I have to negotiate with my fiance. She's already... See, she wants me to lose this, but I don't lose anything. She wants me to throw in the towel at the very end, like wait till December 31st and just say, oh, I got one more movie, I didn't make it, just so, I can get the haircut as the deal made and get rid of all this. But I am not getting rid of all this. I am winning. And I should have probably negotiated something with her that I win something else in addition to getting control of the music if I finish the challenge by Halloween. That would be awesome. I don't know. If you guys have any suggestions, for stuff that you love on Shudder, that you'd like me to watch, leave it in the comments. If it's one I've already seen, I may not do that one just because I'm trying to go through the ones I haven't seen to finish the challenge. But like I said, if you have any suggestions, let me know. And I'll see you next week. And until then, remember, every day is Halloween. Also, I forgot to mention, you can totally follow us on Twitter at Halloween Year Round, or check out the website, HalloweenYearRound.com.